Hi, moving on to chapter 6 for social psychology, cognitive dissonance, and the need to protect our self-esteem. So, in the beginning of the chapter, it tells a story about a cult, a Heaven's Gate cult, who believed that a spaceship behind this Hale-Bopp comet was coming to transport them. So, they needed to rid themselves of their current containers or bodies. Failed to find a spaceship via telescope, assumed the telescope was faulty, and continued with mass suicide. So, how cognitive dissonance plays into this is that they went and bought this telescope. They looked for the spaceship behind the comet and they didn't see it. And instead of assuming that they were wrong about the spaceship, they went back to the store where they got the telescope and they were like, hey, the telescope is broken. And the person's like, no, no, it's not. And they're like, yes, it is. So even though they should have been relieved or maybe changed their mind about this spaceship, they kind of doubled down and most of them still died by suicide. And it's kind of the idea that we had these competing beliefs, like I'm a sane person and a rational person, so I wouldn't believe something that wasn't true. So even when it was disproved to them that there was no spaceship, still were not able, some of the people who were less believers to begin with kind of changed their mind about it. So, cults are very good at picking people who might be in vulnerable positions. We might think that we're intelligent and rational and never would succumb to these ideas, but there's times in all of our lives that we might be prone to do it, right? So cognitive dissonance is the discomfort that people feel when two cognitions, beliefs or attitudes, conflict, or when they behave in ways that threaten their self-esteem. So we like to think of ourselves as rational, good people. So if we would do something that we don't consider good, like if we were littering, that would make us have cognitive dissonance. So we would either have to not litter because we think of ourselves as good people, or we'd have to justify what we did. Well, I littered, but so does everybody else. And, well, I littered, but there's no public trash cans, so I kind of have to anyway. Post-decision dissonance is dissonance aroused after making a decision, typically reduced by enhancing the attractiveness of the chosen alternative and devaluating the rejected alternatives. So let's say someone was choosing what college to go to. And they're like, do I want to do Penn State, Maine? Do I want to do HAC? Do I want to do York College? And they decide to come to HAC and they're, going to save some money for the first couple years. So now they might have now that they've started HAC, they can't change their mind. So they might have some post-decision dissonance. So how they're going to reduce that dissonance is be like, well, Penn State's too big anyway and too expensive, and I didn't really like it, and it's too far from home. So they have to make the decision seem more attractive in their head to reduce that dissonance. Justification of effort, the tendency for individuals to increase their liking for something they have worked hard to attain, especially if they have freely chosen to exert that effort. For example, military going to boot camp, hazing with fraternities. In your book, it talks about they gave people a project where they had to put together a box, and then the other people just had a box. And they wanted to assign a price to it. They were going to sell this box. And the people that made their own box assigned a higher value to it. They found it more valuable because they put it together, they worked on it, which is kind of that old adage of, your parents want you to save money and buy your own car because it'll be more valuable to you than if they buy the car for you, which is apparently true in social psychology. So here you see that the bar graphs. So the people who built it liked their box more than the non-builders. You can see this. I guess they just scale of 1 to 4 on how much they liked it. And then the offer price, the builders were about almost 80 cents, and the non-builders were about 50 cents. Benjamin Franklin, there's a story of him in the chapter where he is talking about someone when he was in Congress. There was a gentleman, another congressperson who didn't like him. And instead of, the theory is, to let someone borrow something of yours to ingratiate yourself with them. Franklin was like, I'm going to borrow something of his. So he asked this guy, he knew he was a book collector. He asked them to borrow one of his really rare books. And the guy was like, okay. So Ben Franklin read it and returned it and got to talking to the guy about it. And it actually made this guy really like him. And they were friends for the rest of their lives after that. So the act of this guy lending him the book was able to make him like Franklin more, because there's some dissonance there. Like, well, I wouldn't lend a book to somebody I didn't like. So right here on the right side is the rating of experimenter. There was this experimenter, and he said, he did this experiment, and at the end, there was some deception. At the end, it was the real experiment, and he was like, hey, can you do me a favor? All this funding comes out of my own money. Can you give some of it back? Okay. And then another condition, he said, hey, it's a favor for the psychology department. Can you give some of the money back? And then no favor at all. And then they asked him to rank this guy. I assume it was like a scale of 1 to 10, how much they liked him. So when they did the favor for him, you can see with the blue there, it was they rated him about a 7. Or maybe it was a scale out of 8, I don't know. How much they liked him. So they liked him more when they did the favor for him. And then when they did it for the psychology department, you see there in the green, it was only about a 4. And then no favor. So it's kind of funny, like you would think the control group would be higher, but the psychology department's the lowest one. I'm sorry, you'd think the control group would be the lowest. Justifying cruelty or dehumanizing the enemy. Sometimes I have this as a short answer question on a midterm, but I don't think I put it on there this year. But basically we had a discussion about, with cognitive dissonance, and we think of ourselves as good people. So how do racist, homophobic, terrorist people, how do people do bad things? If most people then think of themselves as good, how can anyone look at themselves in the mirror? Well, there's a lot of ways. They can use cruel names and portrayals, during the Holocaust, referring to Jews as, cockroaches. They're not people, they're cockroaches, or with building a wall between the US and Mexico, referring to Mexicans as criminals. They're not people, they're criminals, and kind of makes it easier to treat people that way and gets rid of the cognitive dissonance. Moral dilemmas are when we decide to act contrary to our moral beliefs. Threats to our self-esteem arouse dissonance. So we might have these morals, might be, have a moral that you shouldn't hurt animals if you don't have to. You shouldn't go out of your way. If you hit a squirrel when you're driving and you didn't mean to, that's one thing, but going out of your way, or even to kill insects. So if I do something that is inconsistent with that, hurting an animal, then that's going to really cause me some dissonance. And then you might want to engage in dissonance reduction, which is behaving either more ethically or less ethically in the future. So more ethically makes sense, right? You're going to overcompensate. You're going to be like, I did this crappy thing, so I'm going to go out and donate money to the Humane Society. Or less ethically, maybe to reduce your dissonance, you're like, well, animals, they don't really feel pain, or they don't really have souls, so I don't really care about that. And then you're just going to continue to do things to animals because you're like, well, I broke the rule, so what's the point in adhering? Hypocrisy induction is the arousal of dissonance by having individuals make statements that run counter to their behaviors and then reminding them of the inconsistency between what they advocated for and their behavior. The purpose is to lead individuals to more responsible behavior. So just by simply saying something out loud that you're not doing might cause enough dissonance to have you change your mind. So I think the one example in the book was I believe they were all men, and they asked them about their sexual practices, and they were not having safe sex. They were not using condoms, things like that. So they had them get up and do a speech about why using condoms was important. And this was contrary to what they were doing, right? So this caused some dissonance in them. The self-affirmation theory is the idea that people can reduce threats to their self-esteem by affirming themselves in areas unrelated to the source of the threat. So, if you have a friend, maybe you think that like art is your thing or sports are your thing, and you have a friend that's maybe better in that, and it kind of makes you feel some kind of way. You might be like, well, I'm better at this than them, so that's okay. The self-evaluation maintenance theory is the idea that people experience dissonance when someone close to us outperforms us in an area that is central to self-esteem. The dissonance can be reduced by becoming less close to the person, outperforming them, or deciding that the area is not important after all. So it's like, yeah, they're better at me than that, but it doesn't really matter anyway, that skill or whatever isn't important. Narcissism is a combination of excessive self-love and of lack of empathy toward others. Terror management theory is the theory that self-esteem serves as a buffer protecting people from terrifying thoughts about their mortality. So one question that I sometimes ask about terror management theory is, humans, compared to other animals, we know that we're going to die. My dog doesn't get up every morning worrying about death. So this thought of our mortality terrifies us. We kind of cling to cultural and religious beliefs sometimes to make sure that we feel like our life has meaning. And it sounds like a good thing, and it can be, but sometimes it makes people cling to their religion in such a fierce way that they're kind of mean to other people. They might be like, well, I'm going to heaven because of my religion, and you're not. So it can be a bad thing. And there we have it.